Hello, and welcome to Retro Laws. Today, we're going to be looking at a secret group of Sega developers. They were called Smilebit, a studio formed from the legendary creators of the Jet Set radio series. What followed was one of the most fascinating partnerships in gaming history, completely changing the identity of the original Xbox. Chapter 1: The Death of a Dream. The turn of the millennium was a strange and magical time for video game developers. In the neon-lit streets of Tokyo, the creative energy inside Sega was burning incredibly bright. The company had just launched the Dreamcast, a machine that felt years ahead of its rivals. It had a built-in modem for internet play right out of the box. It possessed a unique visual style that made old arcade games look stunning at home. Behind the glass doors of Sega's main offices, the developers were organized into distinct teams. These teams were called Amusement Machine Research Studios, or AM teams for short. Each team operated like a tiny, independent kingdom with its own specific culture. The workers inside these rooms did not just want to make profitable products. They viewed video games as a high form of pop art and futuristic expression. Among these groups, AM7 was widely considered one of the most respected teams in the company. They were the brilliant minds responsible for classic series like Shinobi and Streets of Rage. For over a decade, they had defined the cool side of the Sega brand. They understood how to make action games feel heavy, fast, and satisfying to play. But as the year 2000 rolled forward, the financial reality outside their studio grew incredibly dark. Sony was preparing to launch the PlayStation 2 with an unstoppable marketing campaign. The hype for Sony's new DVD playing machine completely crushed the momentum of the Dreamcast. No matter how hard Sega tried, they could not match the bottomless pockets of Sony. The Dreamcast was selling well to hardcore gamers, but the general public was waiting for the PS2. Sega's brilliant leader, a billionaire named Isao Okawa, was watching the financial charts collapse. He loved the company so much that he spent his own money to keep it alive. He knew that the traditional hardware business was killing his beloved development teams. If Sega kept manufacturing consoles, the entire company would go completely bankrupt within a year. Okawa made a brave but heartbreaking decision for the future of the brand. Sega would stop making video game hardware and become a software-only developer. This shocking announcement sent a massive shockwave through the entire Japanese gaming industry. Inside the walls of AM7, the developers felt a profound sense of grief and confusion. The white console they had grown to love was suddenly an endangered species. The unique hardware features they had mastered were being thrown into the trash heap of history. During this painful corporate transition, Sega decided to restructure all their internal dev teams. They turned the classic AM groups into independent, self-contained companies owned by the parent brand. The legendary creators of AM7 were officially rebranded as a new studio called Smilebit. The name was chosen to show they wanted to bring smiles to gamers using bits of data. The leaders of Smilebit, including veteran producers like Takayuki Kawagoe, looked at their new reality. They were no longer tied down to supporting a failing Sega console. They were suddenly free to make games for any platform on the global market. However, this freedom came with a terrifying amount of artistic pressure. They had to figure out where their unique style belonged in a rapidly changing world. The studio had just finished a game that shocked the industry called Jet Set Radio. It used a brand new visual technique known as cell shading to look like a living cartoon. The game featured rebellious teenagers riding inline skates through a fictional version of Tokyo. It was a celebration of hip-hop culture, street graffiti, and youthful anti-establishment energy. The game proved that Smilebit was the coolest, most experimental studio inside the new Sega. Now, Smilebit needed a new home for their next generation of advanced projects. The obvious choice on paper was to develop games for the dominant PlayStation 2. Sony's console was selling millions of units every single week around the globe. A release on the PS2 would guarantee massive sales and high corporate visibility. Yet, when the artists at Smilebit looked closely at the PlayStation 2, they felt deeply uninspired. The internal hardware architecture of the PS2 was notoriously difficult for creators to understand. It required developers to write complex code to utilize its custom Emotion Engine processor. More importantly, the PS2 felt crowded with traditional, safe video game genres. Smilebit did not want their beautiful, strange art to get lost in a sea of generic titles. They also looked briefly at the upcoming Nintendo GameCube console. The GameCube was cute and powerful, but it was aimed firmly at a family-friendly audience. Smilebit's games were all about graffiti, loud music, and edgy science fiction themes. The tiny purple Nintendo box just did not match the counterculture vibe of the studio. That left one final option on the horizon, and it was the biggest gamble of all. An American software company named Microsoft was building its very first video game console. The machine was massive, heavy, and powered by an Intel Pentium 3 computer processor. The early press for the Xbox was filled with intense skepticism from Japanese critics. Many felt that an American company could never understand the nuanced art of game development. But the engineers at Smilebit saw something different when they looked at the Xbox blueprint. They saw a machine that was raw, powerful, and remarkably easy to program. The Xbox had a built-in hard drive, which was an absolute revolution for home consoles. It possessed a custom graphics card designed by NVIDIA that could push incredible visual details. It was a platform built for rebels who wanted to push technology past its current limits. The developers realized that the Xbox shared the exact same DNA as the tragic Dreamcast. Both machines were built by outsiders who wanted to challenge the status quo of gaming. Both systems focused heavily on internet connectivity and advanced high-definition visual output. Smilebit made a choice that shocked their traditional fans in the Japanese market. They decided to skip the safe profits of the PlayStation 2 entirely. They would risk their entire future on the success of the Microsoft Xbox. This choice was not just about picking a powerful set of computer microchips. It was a philosophical statement about what video games should be in the new century. Smilebit wanted to prove that the spirit of the Dreamcast did not die in early 2001. They believed they could plant that beautiful Sega seed inside the heavy black shell of the Xbox. They hoped to build a brand new paradise for hardcore gamers who craved pure artistic innovation. The working environment inside Smilebit during this transition era was filled with intense, frantic energy. The team had to quickly learn how to translate their Japanese tools to the American hardware. They worked long hours in their Tokyo offices, surrounded by glowing developer kits and concept art. They knew that the eyes of the entire gaming industry were watching their bold experiment. If they failed, they would prove that Sega's creative style was dead for good. But if they succeeded, they would create a legendary bridge between two console generations. They would turn a giant American business experiment into a beautiful home for classic arcade action. The stage was finally set for a secret alliance that no one saw coming. A new era of gaming history was about to be written in the code of the Xbox. Chapter 2: The Windows Connection. To truly understand how the original Xbox became the spiritual successor to the Dreamcast, we must travel backward in time. We have to look past the dramatic console wars of the early 2000s. We need to examine a secret partnership that began in the quiet boardrooms of the late 1990s. During this era, personal computers were entering millions of homes around the world for the first time. Microsoft was ruling the tech world with its famous Windows 95 operating system. Every office and home seemed to feature a computer running Microsoft software. The company was making massive amounts of money, but their leaders were feeling restless. Bill Gates looked at the evolving tech landscape and noticed a brand new threat to his digital empire. That threat was the rapidly growing world of home video game consoles. Sony had surprised everyone by selling tens of millions of the original PlayStation console. Kids and adults were no longer staring at computer monitors for entertainment. Instead, they were gathering around TV sets to play immersive, three-dimensional games. Microsoft realized that if a console maker captured the living room, they could eventually challenge personal computers. Sony was already hinting that the upcoming PlayStation 2 would become a central computer for the home. Microsoft could not let another technology company dominate the living room space without a fight. They needed to find a way into the console market before it was completely too late. However, Microsoft had absolutely no experience building consumer hardware for the television screen. They knew how to write software code, but they did not know how to design gaming hardware. Across the Pacific Ocean, Sega was facing an entirely different kind of corporate crisis. Their Sega Saturn console had suffered a terrible defeat against the dominant Sony PlayStation. The Saturn was too expensive to build and incredibly difficult for third-party studios to program. Sega's engineers knew they had to create a brilliant new machine to save their reputation. This project would eventually become the legendary Dreamcast console. Sega wanted this new machine to be a paradise for game creators everywhere. They wanted to make it incredibly easy for computer developers to bring their games to the console. This mutual need created an unexpected bridge between the green hills of Redmond and the streets of Tokyo. High-level executives from both companies began to meet in secret to discuss a massive technological alliance. Sega wanted Microsoft's help to attract Western PC developers to their new console project. Microsoft wanted to study how a dedicated gaming machine operated in the real world. In 1998, the two giants proudly announced a historic partnership for the upcoming Dreamcast. Microsoft would create a custom version of their Windows CE operating system specifically for Sega's new white box. This special software would sit directly inside the memory of the Dreamcast console alongside Sega's native operating system. When a developer made a game, they could choose which system they wanted to use. They could write code for Sega's custom hardware or use Microsoft's familiar tools. This was a massive architectural shift for the traditional video game industry. The secret weapon inside this Windows CE bundle was a collection of tools known as DirectX. On personal computers, DirectX acted as a universal translator between game software and various graphics cards. Before DirectX, developers had to write unique code for every single type of computer hardware on the market. Microsoft's clever software layer allowed creators to write their code just one single time. The operating system handled the difficult job of translating that code for the hardware. By putting DirectX inside the Dreamcast, Sega opened a massive door for Western game creators. A developer who spent years making PC games could now port their work to the Dreamcast easily. They did not have to spend months learning a strange new hardware language. Famous computer games could suddenly be played on a television screen with minimal development effort. This alliance was the very first time a major console embraced the architectural logic of the PC world. Inside Sega's development studios, teams began to experiment with this new Western software toolset. While some teams preferred Sega's native operating system for its raw speed, others loved the flexibility of Windows. The engineers at Smilebit watched this technological exchange with great interest. They realized that the traditional walls between computer gaming and console gaming were starting to crumble away forever. The future of game development was clearly becoming more universal, open, and standardized. However, the Windows CE experiment on the Dreamcast did not achieve total market victory. The operating system required a small portion of the console's limited system memory to run. Some Japanese developers felt that this extra software layer slowed down the machine's maximum performance. They preferred to write code directly to the bare metal of the Dreamcast hardware instead. Yet, the cultural impact of this partnership inside Microsoft was absolutely massive. For 2 years, Microsoft engineers worked hand in hand with Sega's top console designers. The team from Redmond learned how to optimize graphics tools for traditional television sets. They studied how console controllers communicated with hardware without noticeable input delay. They watched how Sega built an early online gaming network with standard dial-up modems. Microsoft was essentially receiving a masterclass in console design from one of the pioneers of the arcade industry. As the Dreamcast began to struggle financially in late the year 2000, Microsoft reached a critical crossroads. They realized that the Windows CE partnership would not be enough to secure the living room. Sega was losing the market war to Sony's massive PlayStation 2 marketing engine. Microsoft could not rely on a partner to carry their software into the home entertainment space. If they wanted to own the living room, they would have to build their own hardware from scratch. A small group of ambitious engineers inside Microsoft decided to pitch a wild new project to Bill Gates. This team included clever software minds like Seamus Blackley, Kevin Backus, Ted Hasey, and Otto Berkes. They took the basic concept of the Dreamcast partnership and pushed it to the absolute extreme. They asked a very simple but revolutionary question. Why not build a video game console that was literally a personal computer disguised as a gaming box? They wanted to create a machine powered by a standard computer processor and a standard graphics card. This machine would not just run a tiny version of Windows CE in its memory. It would run a complete version of the Windows operating system core at all times. The entire console would be built around the absolute latest version of their DirectX graphics technology. Because of this focus, the team gave the prototype a working title. They called it the DirectX Box. Marketing executives later tried to change the name, but the development team fiercely fought to keep it. They eventually shortened the title down to just one simple, punchy word. The machine would be officially known to the world as the Xbox. From its very birth, the Xbox was built upon the exact foundation discovered during the Dreamcast alliance. It was the natural evolution of the idea that PC technology belonged under the living room television. When Sega officially announced they were leaving the hardware business, Microsoft saw a massive creative opening. They had built a powerful machine, but it was completely empty of artistic personality. They needed Japanese developers who understood how to make games feel magical, unique, and stylized. They specifically targeted the internal studios at Sega that had spent years working alongside their engineering concepts. Smilebit was at the top of Microsoft's wish list for new exclusive software projects. The developers at Smilebit already understood the basic logic of the DirectX development environment. Transitioning from the Dreamcast to the original Xbox felt like moving into a larger house built by the same architect. They did not have to throw away their programming knowledge or start completely from scratch. The tools they used on the Xbox were familiar, incredibly powerful, and perfectly optimized for their needs. This architectural connection explains why Smilebit's Xbox games looked so spectacular right at launch. They did not have to waste years fighting the hardware or guessing how the graphics chip worked. The custom NVIDIA processor inside the Xbox allowed Smilebit to fully realize the dreams they had on the Dreamcast. They could finally push high-resolution textures, complex lighting effects, and massive three-dimensional worlds without dropped frames. The connection between the two systems was so deep that early internet forums were filled with wild rumors. Gamers noticed that the original Xbox controllers featured a very similar shape to the classic Dreamcast controller. Both pads were massive, featured 2 expansion slots for memory cards, and placed the analog sticks in similar positions. The layout of the colored buttons on the front of the pad was almost identical. Fans openly speculated that Microsoft had bought the discarded blueprints for the cancelled Dreamcast 2 console hardware. While Microsoft did not literally buy the physical blueprints, they absolutely inherited the technical philosophy of the machine. The Xbox took the torch that Sega was forced to drop during the cold financial winter of 2001. It carried the dream of an internet-connected, PC-powered console into the next generation of gaming. For a studio like Smilebit, the Xbox was not an alien American intruder in the gaming space. It was a powerful new sanctuary where their artistic philosophy could continue to live, breathe, and grow. The developers packed up their kits in Tokyo and prepared to build a brand new world. They brought their love for electronic music, bright street art, and fast arcade action with them. They were ready to transform Microsoft's heavy black box into a machine with a rebellious soul. The secret alliance was moving out of the boardroom and directly into the hands of eager players worldwide. Chapter 3. The Midnight Handshake. The rain was falling heavily across the city of Tokyo in early 2001. Inside the executive boardrooms of Sega, the atmosphere was incredibly tense and quiet. The company was facing a mountain of debt that threatened to destroy everything. Time was running out for the proud pioneers of the arcade industry. They needed a massive corporate miracle to protect their brilliant game development studios. The legendary chairman of Sega, Isao Okawa, was fighting a very difficult personal battle. He was gravely ill, yet he refused to let his company sink into absolute ruin. Okawa looked across the ocean toward the wealthy tech giants of the United States. He decided to take a desperate gamble to save the legacy of his software teams. The aging chairman got on a plane and flew directly to Washington State. He was traveling to meet the richest man in the world, Bill Gates. Microsoft was deep in the process of building their brand new Xbox console. They had thousands of smart engineers, but they lacked ancient gaming history. Okawa walked into the quiet Microsoft campus with a very specific, historic proposition. He did not want to sell his company for a quick, cheap profit. Instead, he wanted to form a brilliant shield to protect his loyal fans. The meetings between these two corporate titans would become the stuff of absolute legend. Okawa offered Microsoft a deal that could have completely rewritten the history of gaming. The Japanese chairman made a remarkably bold pitch to the executive team at Microsoft. He wanted the upcoming Xbox to feature complete backward compatibility with Dreamcast discs. He wanted a kid to place a white Sega disc inside the black console. The heavy American machine would instantly recognize the code and run the game perfectly. Okawa cared deeply about the active online communities growing around games like Phantasy Star Online. He desperately wanted those digital worlds to survive on Microsoft's advanced internet network. He believed this partnership could create a beautiful bridge between the two platforms. Bill Gates listened patiently to the passionate presentation from the legendary Sega executive. The Microsoft team looked closely at the complicated blueprints of the Dreamcast system. They saw a machine powered by a unique processor and a custom graphics unit. To make the Xbox read those discs, they would need extra hardware components. They would have to place specific Japanese microchips inside every single American console. This addition would significantly raise the manufacturing cost of an already expensive machine. Microsoft's financial experts immediately started to raise major red flags about the plan. The engineers in Redmond wanted a clean break from the old ways of gaming. They were building their new system around standard personal computer architecture and DirectX. Adding old hardware components from a competitor went completely against their core digital strategy. They worried it would confuse developers and slow down the progress of their platform. After several intense rounds of secret negotiations, Microsoft made a difficult business choice. They politely declined the offer to include physical Dreamcast compatibility inside the Xbox. The dream of a hybrid Sega-Microsoft console was officially dead in the boardroom. This rejection was a massive emotional blow to the proud leadership inside Sega. But the secret conversations between the two tech giants did not stop there. Microsoft recognized that Sega possessed the most creative software artists in the entire world. They knew that studios like Smilebit were pushing the absolute limits of interactive art. The Xbox team still needed exclusive games to fight the massive PlayStation monopoly. They shifted the conversation away from hardware compatibility toward an historic software alliance. They offered to fund Sega's top creators if they moved to the Xbox. During this exact period of corporate tension, the early internet began to completely explode. Wild rumors started spreading across classic video game message boards and news sites. Young gamers were sharing whispered secrets about a massive billion-dollar buyout behind closed doors. The rumor claimed that Microsoft was going to purchase the entire Sega corporation outright. Fans envisioned a future where Sonic the Hedgehog became the official mascot of Microsoft. These urban legends reflected the deep anxiety of a generation losing its favorite brand. Gamers desperately wanted a powerful savior to stop the absolute dominance of Sony. The reality behind the scenes was much more calculated, strategic, and professional. Microsoft was not buying the company, but they were spending millions on exclusivity. They wanted to secure the absolute best projects that were originally meant for Dreamcast. Top executives like Peter Moore helped negotiate a monumental multi-game publishing agreement. Microsoft promised to give Sega's independent studios massive development budgets and creative freedom. They wanted these Japanese artists to show the world what the Xbox could do. It was a strategic rescue package disguised as a standard software contract. Tragedy struck the gaming world in late March of 2001. The beloved Sega chairman Isao Okawa passed away at the age of 74. Before his tragic death, he performed one final, legendary act of corporate devotion. He forgave all the personal debts that Sega owed to his private estate. He donated nearly $700 million of his personal stock to the company. This incredible sacrifice completely saved Sega from falling into immediate shameful. It gave his creative development teams the financial runway they needed to survive. Just days after his passing, the secret deal was officially revealed to the public. At the 2001 Tokyo Game Show, Microsoft dropped a massive bombshell. They announced a long-term strategic alliance with the newly restructured software giant. Sega pledged to bring 11 of their most advanced upcoming games to Xbox. The crowd in Tokyo listened in absolute shock as the titles were read aloud. The most important part of the announcement involved the brilliant creators at Smilebit. The studio was moving its entire future focus directly to the American console. This historic announcement completely transformed the public perception of Microsoft's giant black. Western gamers realized the Xbox would not just feature standard American sports games. It was inheriting the strange, beautiful, and rebellious soul of the Sega Dreamcast. The midnight handshake between the executives had successfully created a brand new creative sanctuary. Smilebit was handed the keys to the most powerful hardware on the market. They were ready to unleash a wave of pure artistic innovation upon the world. The developers at Smilebit viewed this corporate deal as a golden technological opportunity. They were no longer limited by the small memory capacity of older systems. The built-in hard drive of the Xbox meant they could stream massive assets seamlessly. They could create bigger worlds, louder soundtracks, and highly detailed character models. The spirit of arcade innovation was not dead. It had simply changed its home. The unique energy of Sega was now flowing directly through American silicon chips. Many gaming historians look back at this specific deal with a sense of wonder. It was a rare moment where corporate desperation and technological ambition aligned perfectly. Microsoft got the artistic credibility they desperately needed to survive the console generation. Sega secured the financial survival of their most precious and talented development groups. The legendary white swirl of the Dreamcast had faded out of the market. But the green light of the Xbox was turning on with Sega's DNA inside. Inside the game rooms of early adopters, the connection felt incredibly real and vibrant. Players who bought the Xbox at launch noticed the unique vibe of the software. The games did not look or feel like the cinematic experiences on PlayStation. They were fast, colorful, loud, and completely focused on pure gameplay mechanics. The community realized that the spirit of the Dreamcast too was sitting in their living room. It was a heavy, dark machine, but it carried the torch of arcade history. The urban legends about the buyout eventually faded into standard video game history. Gamers stopped looking for a hidden Sega logo stamped inside the plastic casing. They began to judge the partnership by the actual quality of the software experiences. Smilebit was working day and night in Tokyo to deliver on their massive promises. They were preparing a trilogy of titles that would define the early Xbox library. These games would prove that the Midnight Handshake was worth every single dollar spent. The legacy of Isao Okawa lived on through the work of his favorite artists. His final corporate gamble had successfully protected the creative freedom of his employees. The developers did not have to compromise their unique vision for safe retail profits. They were allowed to remain rebels, dreamers, and technological pioneers on a new frontier. The grand story of Smilebit on the Xbox was finally ready to begin. The world was about to see what happens when Sega art meets Microsoft power. Every line of code written during this era carried the weight of this history. The programmers knew they were honoring a beautiful dream that refused to die. They worked with a profound sense of purpose and a desire to shock the industry. The heavy American console was about to become the most exciting place to play games. The stage was set for an explosion of style, speed, and futuristic vision. The glorious spirit of the Dreamcast was officially waking up inside its new black shell. Chapter 4. The Smilebit Trilogy on Xbox. The year 2002 arrived with a massive sense of anticipation for early console buyers. Inside the heavy black box of the Xbox, a revolutionary graphics chip was waiting. Smilebit did not waste a single second trying to copy popular American shooting games. Instead, they dropped 3 completely unique masterpieces onto the young game system. These titles would quickly become legendary among dedicated fans of the classic Sega brand. They perfectly showcased the incredible processing power of Microsoft's new hardware architecture. The very first game to shock the world was Jet Set Radio Future. This was not a simple port of the original Dreamcast classic game. It was a complete reimagining of the concept for a brand new generation. The developers wanted to create a world that felt completely seamless and endless. The original Dreamcast game was limited by small hardware memory and strict level timers. Players had to rush through stages before the countdown clock reached 0. Smilebit used the Xbox hard drive to completely eliminate the old limits. They built a massive, interconnected version of Tokyo that felt truly alive. Players could skate seamlessly from the bright lights of Shibuya Terminal to 99th Street. The sense of speed was vastly superior to anything seen on older hardware. The frame rate remained incredibly smooth, even with dozens of characters on screen. The game replaced the complex joystick graffiti prompts with a faster, fluid tagging system. You could spray beautiful art while grinding down a massive metal railing at top speed. The visual style of Jet Set Radio Future was a true technical marvel. The team pushed the cel shading art style into a beautiful new visual dimension. The custom NVIDIA graphics card added stunning real-time reflections to every metallic surface. The clothing of the characters flowed naturally as they performed wild mid-air tricks. The world felt like a living, breathing comic book dipped in neon paint. The audio experience was just as revolutionary as the bright visual presentation. Composer Hideki Naganuma created a soundtrack that defined the cool identity of the console. The heavy electronic beats blasted beautifully through the Xbox's advanced digital sound chip. The music did not just play in the background of the levels. The songs actively drove the rhythmic pace of the skating and jumping mechanics. It gave the young American console a sharp, rebellious Japanese artistic edge. A fascinating piece of community mythology soon surrounded this legendary skating. The game was famously bundled on a single disc with Sega GT 2002. Millions of families received this exact combo disc when they bought the console. Because of this, almost every early Xbox owner played Jet Set Radio Future. Yet, the game struggled to sell well as a standalone retail product. An urban legend spread that the game was a massive financial disaster for Sega. In reality, the bundle deal was highly profitable for the corporate parent company. It guaranteed that Smilebit's unique art style reached millions of mainstream living rooms. The combo disc became a holy grail for kids looking for something different. It introduced a whole generation of players to the beautiful spirit of Sega. The game left a permanent mark on the visual culture of the era. The second title in the legendary trilogy was an experimental game called Gun Valkyrie. This project possessed one of the most interesting development histories of the time. The game originally started its life as a late-era Sega Dreamcast title. Early prototypes showed a game controlled with a light gun and a controller. When the hardware died, Smilebit moved the entire project to the Xbox. They decided to completely redesign the control scheme from the ground up. The final product used a control method that polarized the entire gaming community. The game required players to utilize both analog sticks in a unique way. You had to click the sticks down to activate your booster rockets. It felt less like a traditional shooter and more like playing an instrument. The learning curve was incredibly steep for players used to safe designs. The setting of Gun Valkyrie was a beautiful, dark, steampunk alternative version of 1906. Players controlled two elite soldiers named Kelly and Sabaruta as they fought monsters. They wore heavy mechanical suits powered by a mysterious energy source called Elixir. They were sent to a distant colony planet to investigate a massive mystery. The entire colony had been overrun by giant, chittering alien insect creatures. The visual design of the game was incredibly striking, heavy and metallic. Smilebit used the Xbox to create massive outdoor stages with immense verticality. Players had to stay airborne by chaining together complex booster rocket jumps. If you touched the ground for too long, the bugs would swarm you. The metallic sheen on the soldier suits looked spectacular under the virtual sun. The game proved that Smilebit could create dark, challenging sci-fi action experiences. An urban legend quickly grew around the extreme difficulty of the game. Early internet forums claimed that the controls were actually a programming mistake. Players whispered that the developers forgot to finish the standard controller configuration layout. This myth was completely false, as the design was entirely intentional. Smilebit wanted to create a game that rewarded absolute physical player mastery. Those who took the time to learn the system felt like gods. You could float through the air while blasting enemies in multiple directions. It remains a legendary example of uncompromised Japanese arcade game design logic. The game refused to hold the hand of the modern casual player. It demanded perfection, and it offered a truly unforgettable gameplay experience. The final masterpiece of the Xbox trilogy was Panzer Dragoon Orta. This game marked the triumphant return of a legendary Sega franchise history. The original trilogy on the Sega Saturn console was considered high art. The original development group, Team Andromeda, had sadly dissolved years before this project. However, many key members had moved directly into the rooms of Smilebit. They wanted to show that they still remembered how to make dragons fly. Panzer Dragoon Orta was a traditional rail shooter pushed to the absolute limit. The player controlled a young girl named Orta locked inside a tower. A beautiful white dragon suddenly rescues her from a cruel military empire. Together, they fly through a post-apocalyptic world filled with tragic beauty. The narrative was deeply emotional, despite having very little traditional spoken dialogue. The graphical presentation of the game was absolutely jaw-dropping in late 2002. Smilebit created natural environments that left players completely breathless during fast flights. The first level featured a massive storm over a beautiful churning ocean. The water effects looked superior to almost anything else on the global market. The dragon moved with a fluid grace that felt real and alive. The core gameplay mechanic revolved around changing the form of your dragon. Players could switch between 3 distinct forms instantly during intense aerial combat. The base wing was a balanced form, perfect for standard enemy waves. The heavy wing offered massive armor but moved very slowly through the sky. The glide wing was incredibly fast and could lock onto multiple targets. This system turned the simple rail shooter into a deep tactical puzzle. The musical score for the game was a beautiful, sweeping orchestral triumph. Composers Saori Kobayashi and Yutaka Minobe created a deeply moving sonic landscape. The music combined classical instruments with strange, futuristic electronic tones perfectly. It captured the melancholy feeling of a world sliding into absolute decay. The ending theme song left many hardcore players in tears at completion. A beautiful myth surrounded the creation of this specific rail shooting game. Rumors claimed that Smilebit hid a complete sequel to Panzer Dragoon Saga inside. Panzer Dragoon Saga was an incredibly rare and expensive Saturn role-playing game. While a full sequel did not exist, the truth was still amazing. Smilebit hid the entire original computer port of Panzer Dragoon inside the options. They also included a massive encyclopedia covering the deep lore of the world. It was a beautiful love letter to the history of the franchise. The studio proved they cared deeply about preserving the art of the past. They used the massive storage of the Xbox disc to reward fans. It remains one of the greatest unlockable bonuses in video game history. Together, these three games formed an unforgettable artistic trilogy on the console. They showed that the Xbox was not just a home for shooters. Smilebit brought a level of visual poetry that the system desperately lacked. They proved that Japanese arcade design could thrive on raw American hardware. The trilogy cemented the reputation of the Xbox as the true Dreamcast 2. Every game in this collection pushed the hardware in a unique direction. One focused on style, one on difficulty, and one on beauty. They represented the absolute peak of Smilebit's creative power as a studio. The developers had successfully fulfilled their grand promise to the late chairman. They kept the flame of Sega burning bright in a dark world. Chapter 5: The Dreamcast 2 Legacy. The bright neon lights of the early 2000s slowly began to fade away into history. Smilebit had given everything they possessed to the original Xbox console library. Their beautiful trilogy of games had completely redefined what the system could look like. Yet, the brutal financial reality of the retail market was starting to strike back hard. The final sales figures inside the massive American market were deeply disappointing to executives. Japanese players refused to buy the heavy Western machine in any significant numbers. The unique console was widely viewed as an alien intruder in the Tokyo gaming scene. Smilebit's brilliant artistic gamble had failed to capture a massive mainstream global audience. Hardcore fans loved the exclusive games deeply, but the general public walked away. The studio found itself standing at another difficult corporate crossroads very quickly. The developers had proved their absolute technical mastery over the advanced American hardware. They had shown that code could be turned into a beautiful form of pop art. But a video game studio cannot survive on critical praise and high artistic marks alone. They needed consistent retail profits to keep their massive offices running in Tokyo. In the middle of 2003, Sega announced another major reorganization. The legendary parent company could no longer afford to run multiple independent studios. They needed to consolidate their artistic talent to survive a rapidly changing industry. The proud, independent name of Smilebit was suddenly facing an unexpected corporate transformation. The creative studio was split into two completely separate teams by management. The talented designers who made classic action games were immediately merged into Amusement Vision. This specific group was led by Toshihiro Nagoshi, a highly respected creator at Sega. The remaining development staff at Smilebit was forced to focus entirely on sports simulations. They were tasked with creating safe, profitable sports titles for a mass audience. The magical era of wild, experimental science fiction action projects had come to an end. The artists who gave us Jet Set Radio Future had to adapt quickly. They were now working on traditional soccer, baseball, and horse racing simulations instead. A few years later, a massive gaming corporation named Sammy purchased the Sega brand. This historic corporate merger completely dissolved the classic studio structure for The remaining sports team was officially renamed as Sega Sports Research and Development. The beautiful company logo with the green chest and blue rectangle vanished forever. The veteran developers were eventually tasked with a very surprising new crossover project. They built the highly successful Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games series. It was a massive global financial success that sold millions of copies worldwide. The former creative rebels of Smilebit were now making family games for Nintendo systems. The chaotic, counterculture spirit of Tokyo 2 had been successfully tamed by commercial reality. The developers who once challenged the entire industry were now working on safe projects. It felt like a quiet, tragic end for a legendary group of artists. But their architectural ideas and design philosophies refused to disappear from the world. To find the true lasting legacy of this partnership, we must look closely at the internet. The Sega Dreamcast was the absolute pioneer of unified online console gaming networks. It introduced millions of traditional households to the wonders of the digital web. Players used slow dial-up modems to communicate in Phantasy Star Online. They built close virtual friendships years before modern social media networks existed. Microsoft watched this dedicated online community grow with an immense amount of it. The engineering team in Redmond took these exact structural lessons to build Xbox Live. They realized that online play was the absolute future of the home console. Microsoft decided to make a built-in broadband Ethernet port mandatory for their system. They built a subscription service that improved upon Sega's early online concepts. When Phantasy Star Online released on the original Xbox, it required Xbox Live. The game became a central pillar for Microsoft's early digital community efforts. The online infrastructure of the modern industry was built directly on this foundation. The deep cultural connection between the two companies was cemented by one specific executive. In 2003, the former president of Sega of America made a massive move. Peter Moore officially left the Japanese brand to join the leadership team at Microsoft. He was the man who famously had to cancel the Dreamcast console hardware. Now, he was handed the keys to the rapidly growing Xbox brand strategy. Moore brought the unique, aggressive marketing style of Sega directly to Microsoft. He understood exactly how to appeal to the rebellious nature of teenage gamers. He famously used dramatic showmanship, like revealing game release dates with fake arm tattoos. Under his calculated leadership, the Xbox brand transformed into a massive global entertainment giant. The commercial spirit of the Dreamcast marketing campaign had successfully migrated to its rival. Microsoft learned how to be cool by hiring the people who ran Sega. The corporate DNA of both companies had become permanently entangled in the market. The technological legacy of this deal completely changed how modern home consoles are manufactured. The Dreamcast's brief alliance with Windows CE was the historic first step. It proved that consoles did not need strange custom microprocessor architectures to succeed. The original Xbox pushed this radical concept to its absolute logical conclusion. It proved to the world that a video game console could be a personal computer. Today, the modern PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X follow this exact hardware path. They are built with standard computer processors and familiar graphics processing unit cards. Modern game developers can easily move their software projects between completely different platforms. They no longer have to rewrite millions of lines of custom assembly code. The open, flexible architectural vision pioneered by Sega and Microsoft has become the absolute standard. The strange American black box had successfully won the long architectural console war. This extreme technical closeness soon birthed a massive, lasting piece of community mythology. For over 2 decades, an incredible urban legend has refused to die online. Gamers claimed that Microsoft kept a secret physical Dreamcast 2 prototype in Washington. The rumor whispered that the machine was a perfect hybrid of both systems. Fans searched through early tech patent filings looking for any hidden corporate proof. They believed that Bill Gates had secretly purchased Sega's unreleased hardware blueprints. This popular myth was fueled by the intense desire of fans to see Sega return. They simply could not accept that the proud hardware pioneer was gone forever. The real-world historical evidence easily debunks the idea of a secret hybrid console. Microsoft never built a physical Dreamcast successor inside their secret industrial design labs. They preferred to focus their immense wealth on promoting their own hardware brand. The Dreamcast 2 was never a real piece of plastic sitting in a vault. However, the absolute truth behind this myth was actually hiding inside global arcades. Sega built a magnificent arcade system board named the Sega Chihiro. This piece of industrial hardware was literally an original Xbox built into a cabinet. It used the exact same Pentium processor and NVIDIA graphics chip as the console. The only major upgrade was the addition of extra system memory for arcade textures. Japanese arcades were suddenly running games powered entirely by Microsoft's computer architecture. Smilebit used this unique hardware system to build a beautiful racing game called Ollie King. The famous studio Amusement Vision used it to create the legendary Outrun 2. The Chihiro board was the literal reverse of the original Dreamcast partnership dream. Instead of putting Microsoft software inside a Sega console, Sega put Xbox hardware inside arcades. It stood as a beautiful technical symbol of their deep corporate friendship. The line between American computers and Japanese arcade action had completely dissolved away. The artistic influence of Smilebit's trilogy continues to ripple through modern video games today. Look closely at the popular cel-shaded art styles of current independent titles. The colorful visual aesthetic of games like Hi-Fi Rush traces directly to Smilebit. Modern designers still study how Jet Set Radio Future blended music with physical movement. They copy the bold graffiti art style and the flowing character animations seamlessly. Smilebit proved that video games did not need realistic graphics to be stunningly beautiful. They treated the virtual TV screen as a canvas for bright pop art illustration. The rebellious street style of Tokyo lives on in the hearts of young creators. The studio's unique artistic DNA is permanently woven into the fabric of modern gaming. They showed that games could be loud, expressive, and completely unconcerned with tradition. Their visual courage paved the way for a more diverse, colorful industry. The mechanical design choices of Gun Valkyrie also left a very deep, lasting mark. The intense, double analog stick control scheme was decades ahead of its time. Modern third-person action games regularly use complex booster and air dash mechanics now. Creators realized that players could handle advanced physics if they practiced hard enough. Gun Valkyrie proved that a game could achieve high art through its absolute mechanical difficulty. It refused to compromise its unique control layout for the casual retail market. Today, hardcore action fans look back at the title with an immense amount of respect. It remains a shining monument to an era when developers took massive risks. The demanding gameplay loop is celebrated as a pure triumph of arcade design logic. It showed that struggle and mastery could create a deeply satisfying emotional reward. We must also remember the breathtaking flight of Panzer Dragoon Orta today. That game proved that classic franchises could successfully survive a massive generational jump. Smilebit showed immense respect for the deep narrative lore of the Saturn era. They did not erase the past to make a modern commercial product. Instead, they built a beautiful digital museum inside the game's custom options menu. They preserved the original game code so new players could experience gaming history. This focus on software preservation has become a major movement in the modern industry. Panzer Dragoon Auto remains one of the most beautiful rail shooters ever created. Its tragic narrative and sweeping orchestral music still resonate with players 20 years later. It proved that arcade mechanics could carry the weight of an epic story. Imagine walking back into that quiet bedroom from the cold winter of 2001. The bright orange swirl of the Dreamcast has long since faded from television screens. The heavy black box of the original Xbox sits covered in dust on the shelf. The glass CRT monitors have been replaced by flat, high-definition digital displays everywhere. The corporate console wars that seemed so massive back then are ancient history now. Sega and Microsoft are no longer fighting for control of the living room space. They are mature industry giants navigating a completely different modern entertainment landscape. Yet, if you look closely at your modern consoles, the ghost still remains. The digital soul of that dead white machine is still quietly whispering in the code. The secret billion-dollar deal did not create a physical Dreamcast 2 console hardware. It did something much more beautiful, lasting, and profoundly artistic for the world. It allowed a group of brilliant Japanese rebels to save their creative identity. Smilebit took the burning artistic spirit of Sega and injected it into Microsoft's soul. They turned a cold corporate computer experiment into a place of pure gaming joy. They proved to the world that the art of video games cannot be killed by bankruptcy. The glowing green ring of the Xbox still carries that beautiful, rebellious orange energy. The dream of the Dreamcast did not die in early 2001 at all. It simply found a powerful new home inside a heavy black box,